Some nights I still hear the silence. It's a funny thing to say, I know. Silence is the absence of sound, but not the one I'm talking about. This was a heavy silence, a living thing that presses down on you. For 40 years, I've carried it with me, a weight in my chest that never quite goes away. My name is Arthur, and for most of my life, I was a forest ranger. I saw things out there people in cities wouldn't believe. But there's one memory, one day that I buried deeper than any winter frost. I told myself I was protecting my career, my family, my sanity. But the truth is, I was just afraid. And my biggest regret is that my fear made me a liar, not by what I said, but by what I kept locked away. It happened in the autumn of '78. The air in the high country had that sharp, clean bite to it, the kind that smells of pine needles and cold stone. The leaves on the aspens had turned a brilliant, trembling gold, and the sunlight slanted through the canopy in long, dusty shafts. I was on a routine patrol, checking for illegal traps deep in the Sawtooth sector, a part of the forest so remote you could walk for 3 days and not see another soul. I loved that isolation. It felt pure. That day, though, something was off. It started around mid-morning. The birds went quiet. Not just a lull, but a complete sudden stop. One moment the jays were squawking and the chickadees were chattering, the next, nothing. The only sound was the wind whispering through the tops of the Douglas firs. I stopped walking, listening. Every ranger knows that a silent forest is a watched forest. A predator is near. I scanned the trees, my hand resting on the small hatchet at my belt. I thought maybe a mountain lion or a bear, but the silence held for too long. It was thick, unnatural. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, carried on the breeze. It was musky, oily, like a wet dog mixed with something rotting and something else I couldn't place. Something almost human. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I'd smelled every animal in these woods, from a dead elk to a bear's den. This was none of them. I kept moving. Slower now, my senses on high alert. I tried to reason it away. A carcass maybe carried by the wind. But the feeling of being watched intensified. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on the back of my neck, as if a pair of eyes were following my every step from the deep shadows between the ancient cedars. I felt small, exposed. The forest I knew as my home suddenly felt alien, and I was an intruder. That's when I heard the sound. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was a low, resonant hum, so deep I felt it in my bones more than I heard it with my ears. It was a sound of immense power, held in reserve. The vibration seemed to hang in the air for a moment, and then it was gone, leaving that heavy silence in its place. I should have turned back. Every instinct, every year of training told me to get out of there. But I was young, proud. I thought I knew every secret these mountains held. I pushed forward, telling myself I needed to investigate. A few hundred yards later, I saw it. A tree, a thick pine about a foot in diameter, had been snapped in half about 10 feet off the ground. The wood was splintered, twisted like a wet rag. No wind could do that. No bear had that kind of leverage or strength. The break was fresh, the sap still sticky and fragrant. I ran my hand over the rough, shattered wood, and a cold dread washed over me. Whatever did this was impossibly strong. I looked around, my heart pounding against my ribs. The forest was a wall of green and shadow. Nothing moved, but I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that I was not alone. The thing that had snapped that tree was close. It was watching me, and for the first time in my life, standing in the wilderness that I loved, I felt a terror so profound it almost buckled my knees. It was the fear of the unknown, of something that shouldn't exist but clearly did. And as I stood there frozen, I saw a shadow detach itself from a larger shadow about 50 yards away. It wasn't an animal. It was huge, upright, and it moved with a silent, fluid grace that belied its incredible size. It took one step into a sliver of sunlight, and I saw dark, matted hair and a broad, powerful shoulder. Then, just as quickly, it melted back into the forest. Gone. I never saw its face. I didn't need to. I knew what I had seen, and I knew my life would never be the same. I didn't run. You don't run in the deep woods. Running makes you pray. I backed away slowly, one step at a time, my eyes locked on the spot where the shadow had been. My boots made no sound on the thick bed of pine needles. The silence was still there, absolute and suffocating. Every nerve in my body was screaming, a high-pitched whine of pure adrenaline. I could feel its eyes on me even though I couldn't see it. The feeling was as real as the cold sweat trickling down my spine. It was a pressure, a physical weight in the air. It knew I was there. It had let me see it. That was the most terrifying part. It wasn't hiding from me. It was observing me. I must have backed up for a quarter of a mile before I dared to turn around. Even then, I walked backwards half the time, my gaze sweeping the impenetrable wall of trees. The forest, my sanctuary, had become a maze of hiding places for something ancient and powerful. The golden light of the aspens now seemed mocking, too bright for the dark secret the woods held. I finally broke into a jog, a controlled, ground-eating pace that I could maintain for miles. I had to get back to the truck, back to the world of roads and radios and rules that made sense. On my way back, I crossed a small, muddy creek, and there, pressed deep into the soft earth, was a footprint. It was massive, at least 16 inches long, wide and deeply indented. It was shaped like a human foot, but broader, thicker, with 5 clear toe impressions. It was so clear, so undeniable, it felt like a deliberate sign left for me. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. This was real. The snapped tree, the smell, the hum, the shadow. It was all real. I didn't have a camera with me, not on a routine patrol. Part of me was glad. I didn't want proof. I just wanted to forget. My father, a logger his whole life, always said, "Some trees are best left standing, son. You don't know what'll fall with them." I felt that now. Cutting down this tree, exposing this truth, felt like it would bring the whole world crashing down. The rest of the hike was a blur of controlled panic. I reached my patrol truck just as the sun began to dip below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I'd never been so happy to feel the cold metal of a door handle in my hand. I locked the doors, something I never did, and sat there for a long time, just breathing, the engine off, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. The silence out here was different. It was a normal, empty silence. The heavy, watchful silence was gone, left behind in the Sawtooth sector. Back at the ranger station, the fluorescent lights hummed with an artificial cheerfulness. The smell of stale coffee and paperwork was a comfort. My supervisor, George, was heading out for the day. He was a good man, close to retirement, who'd seen it all. Or so I thought. "Quiet day, Arthur?" he asked, putting on his coat. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I just managed a small, "Yep, all clear." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. It was the first brick in a wall I would spend the next 40 years building around that memory. That night, I sat down to write my patrol log. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. What was I supposed to write? Investigated strange smell and unnatural silence. Saw a 10-foot-tall creature of myth snap a pine tree before vanishing. They would have sent me for a psychological evaluation. I'd lose my job, the only thing I'd ever wanted to do. My wife, my young son. How could I explain it to them? How could I put that burden on them? So I wrote a different story. I noted the snapped pine, attributing it to possible freak wind shear. I mentioned the unusual lack of wildlife activity. I filled the page with plausible, boring details. Each word was a betrayal of what I knew to be true. I was a ranger. My job was to observe and report the truth of the forest. And in that moment, I failed. I sealed the truth away, buried it under official jargon and scientific excuses. I closed the logbook, and with it, a part of myself. The silence of the forest had followed me home, and it settled deep inside my soul, where it has lived ever since. I had seen one of the world's greatest mysteries, and my only response was to lie. That was the real monster I met that day, the one I created myself. For weeks, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the Sawtooth sector, the silence pressing in, the smell of musk and rot filling my lungs. I'd see that shadow move, a flicker of impossible size in the corner of my vision, and I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. My wife, Sarah, would stir beside me, her voice thick with sleep. "Arthur, are you all right?" And I'd lie again. "Bad dream," I'd mumble. "Just a bad dream." How could I tell her the truth? That the dream was real, and the waking world was the thing that felt like a lie. My job, my life's calling, became a form of slow torture. Every morning I'd put on my uniform, lace up my boots, and drive back into the very place that haunted my nights. The forest had changed for me. It was no longer a place of solitude and peace. It was a place of secrets, and I was now one of them. Every snapped branch made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of unseen eyes. I avoided the Sawtooth sector entirely, changing my patrol routes, making excuses to George about needing to check on trail erosion in the East Ridge or reports of poachers near the southern boundary. He never questioned it. To him, I was the same dependable ranger I'd always been, but I knew I was a coward. I carried that fear with me like a stone in my gut. My son Thomas was only 5 at the time. He loved my stories of the woods, of the deer and the bears and the eagles. He'd sit on my lap in the evening, his small hands holding one of the pine cones I'd brought home for him. "What did you see today, Daddy?" he'd ask, his eyes wide with wonder. And I'd tell him about a woodpecker or a fox, simple and safe truths. I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the real giant that walked in the woods. In protecting him from the story, I felt like I was building a wall between us, a wall made of the things I could never say. One weekend, my father came to visit. He was retired from logging by then, his hands gnarled and scarred from a lifetime of working with trees. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset behind the mountains. He was a quiet man, but he saw things. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "You're carrying something heavy, son. I can see it in your eyes." I just shook my head, unable to form the words. He didn't press me. Instead, he just nodded towards the dark line of the forest. "You remember what I always told you?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "Some trees are best left standing, son. You don't know what'll fall with them." I felt a chill run down my spine. He had no idea how right he was. I had chosen to leave that tree standing to not tell my story, but something had fallen anyway. It had fallen inside of me. As the years went by, the sharp edges of the memory began to dull, but the weight of it never lessened. It became a part of me, a quiet, cold spot in my soul. I became known as a cautious ranger, meticulous, by the book. Some of the younger guys thought I was overly careful, even paranoid. They didn't know that my caution was born from a single moment of seeing something that defied every book ever written. I never went back to that muddy creek, never tried to find that footprint again. I didn't need to. It was burned into my mind. My career progressed. George retired, and eventually I took his place as supervisor. I sent other rangers, young men full of the same pride and confidence I once had, into the deep woods. I'd look at the map, at the Sawtooth sector, and feel a pang of guilt. Was I being irresponsible by not warning them? But what would I say? Be careful of the 16-inch footprints and the 10-foot shadow that smells like death? They'd think I had lost my mind. So I kept my silence. I told them to be wary of bears, to watch for sudden weather changes, to respect the mountain. I taught them the tangible dangers, the ones we were allowed to believe in. I thought I had buried it for good. I thought I had locked that day away in a part of my mind that no one, not even myself, could ever visit again. I raised my son. I loved my wife. I did my job. I lived a life. But the silence of the forest never truly left me. It was always there, just beneath the surface. A low hum I could feel in my bones. It was waiting. I learned that some secrets don't stay buried forever. They have roots, and those roots can push their way through even the hardest, most compacted earth, reaching for the light. And 40 years later, my secret was about to break the surface. It was 40 years ago, but some days it feels like it was last Tuesday. I retired from the service a decade ago. I got my gold watch and a firm handshake from a man half my age who called me a legend. If he only knew. Sarah passed away 5 years back. A quiet fading from a life lived with a man who was only ever half there. I see her sometimes in the way the morning light hits the dust motes dancing in the living room. She never knew my secret. I told myself I was protecting her, but really, I was just protecting myself from the shame of my own fear. My son, Thomas, is a man now with a son of his own. He's a biologist at the state university. He has my love for the wilderness, but his is an academic love, one of data points and species classification. Mine was simpler, more primal. He thinks the woods are a system to be understood. I know they're a place that can swallow you whole, a place where understanding doesn't matter when you're faced with something that breaks all the rules. We're close, but there's always been that wall, the one I built brick by brick with every lie of omission. He knows I carry a sadness, a weight, but he thinks it's from the things a ranger sees: fires, lost hikers, the harshness of nature. He doesn't know it's from the one thing I saw that I can't explain. I thought I had finally outrun the memory. I live a quiet life now. I fish in the mornings, tend to my small garden, and watch the seasons change on the face of the mountains from my porch. The Sawtooth Range is still visible from here, a jagged, dark line against the sky. I don't look at it for too long, but the past has a long reach. It found me on a rainy Thursday in October. The phone rang, a shrill sound that cut through the quiet hum of my afternoon. I expected it to be Thomas checking in. It wasn't. The voice on the other end was young, energetic. "Am I speaking with Arthur, former supervisor of the National Forest Service?" "I'm Arthur," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. "My name is Brian," he said. "I'm a freelance journalist. I'm doing a piece on unexplained phenomena in the Pacific Northwest, specifically focusing on a series of historical accounts from the Sawtooth sector." A cold dread, familiar and sharp, settled in my stomach. It was the same feeling I'd had standing over that impossible footprint. "I don't know anything about that," I said, my voice flat. It was the same lie I'd been telling myself for 40 years. "Well, that's not what the records say," Brian continued, his tone friendly but persistent. "I was digging through old patrol logs from the late 70s. Your name came up. Patrol log from October 12, 1978. You reported a snapped pine attributed to freak wind shear and noted a complete absence of wildlife. That same week, 2 separate hikers on the other side of the ridge reported hearing what they called a deep humming sound and smelling a terrible odor. Sounds like you were right in the middle of it, Arthur." I was silent. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, waiting. The rain pattered against the window pane. I was back in the forest, the silence pressing in. "Wind shear is common in the high country," I said, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "And hikers imagine things all the time." "Maybe," Brian said, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "But here's the thing that got my attention. A few weeks ago, a group of college students were doing geological surveys up there. They were using ground-penetrating radar. They found something odd. A set of tracks, buried under 4 decades of sediment and pine needles leading down to that same muddy creek you patrolled. The impressions are deep, and the gate is huge. The university is trying to keep it quiet, but one of the students is my cousin. He sent me the scans. My heart felt like a stone in my chest. Proof. After all these years, there was proof. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I want the truth," he said simply. "You were there, Arthur. The official report feels incomplete, like you were holding something back. Anything you could tell me would be off the record, just for background." I should have hung up. I should have said he had the wrong man, but the word truth hung in the air between us. It was a word I hadn't allowed myself to think about for a lifetime. "I have nothing to say," I told him, and I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle, cutting him off. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the phone. The roots of my secret were breaking the surface. I walked over to the window and looked out at the mountains. The Sawtooth peaks were shrouded in mist, looking like the teeth of some great sleeping beast. I had left that tree standing all those years ago, just like my father advised. But now, something was falling, and it was about to fall right on top of my world. Because I knew what Brian, the journalist, didn't. My son, Thomas, was leading that university research team. My hand trembled as I put the phone down. It wasn't the cold of the room. It was the cold of a grave being opened. A deep 40-year-old cold. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. Brian, the journalist. Thomas, my son. Ground-penetrating radar. The words echoed in the quiet house, each one a shovelful of dirt thrown onto my carefully constructed piece. They had found the tracks. After all this time, the proof I had run from was being unearthed by my own son. The irony was so bitter it felt like I had swallowed poison. I walked to the gun cabinet in the corner of the living room. I didn't open it. I just rested my forehead against the cool glass, looking at the reflection of a tired old man. My father's rifle, a Winchester Model 70, stood inside. He used it for elk. I'd never fired it. I thought about that day, about the shadow in the trees. It hadn't been aggressive, it had been curious, watchful. It let me go, and I repaid it with silence, with a lie that had shadowed my entire life. Now that lie was crumbling. I couldn't call Thomas. What would I say? "Son, stop digging. The monster you're looking for is real, and it's been haunting your father for 4 decades. He'd think I was losing my mind. That old age was finally catching up to me. He would come over with concern in his eyes, maybe suggest I talk to someone. He wouldn't believe me. He'd try to explain it away with science, with data. But this thing was beyond data. It was ancient, and it belonged to the silence. I had to see him. I had to look him in the eye. I grabbed my old canvas jacket from the hook by the door and the keys to my truck. It was a 2-hour drive to the university. 2 hours on winding mountain roads that I knew like the back of my hand. As I pulled out of my gravel driveway, the old truck groaned in protest. The engine was a familiar, comforting rumble, a sound from a world that made sense. But today, it just felt like it was carrying me towards a reckoning. The drive was a torment. Every stand of pine trees looked like a hiding place. Every dark shadow in the woods seemed to shift as I drove past. I kept glancing at the sawtooth peaks in my rearview mirror, a constant reminder of where it all began. I saw Sarah's face in my mind, her gentle smile. I had failed her too. I had lived beside her but never truly with her, always holding a piece of myself back, locked away in that dark forest. I thought of my father's words again, the ones he'd said on the porch that day. Some trees are best left standing. I had tried, Dad, I really had. But the roots had grown too deep and now they were tearing up the foundation of my life. About an hour into the drive, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. It was Thomas. My heart seized in my chest. I let it ring 3 times, my hand hovering over it, before I finally pressed the button. "Hey, Dad?" His voice was bright, filled with an academic excitement that felt a world away from the dread I was drowning in. "You got a minute?" "I'm driving, son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's up?" "I know, but you're not going to believe this. Remember that geological survey I was telling you about in the Sawtooths?" I gripped the steering wheel. "I remember. Well, we found something. Something incredible. The radar scans picked up a series of massive bipedal tracks. I mean, huge. The stride length is almost 15 feet. Whatever made them was enormous. We're talking about a completely unknown primate species, Dad. This could change everything." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the sound of the wind whipping past my window and the excited voice of my son, who had no idea he was describing the ghost that had lived in my head for 40 years. "The press is going to get wind of this soon," he continued, oblivious to my silence. "A journalist already called the department, some guy named Brian. But we're keeping it under wraps until we can get a proper excavation team up there, can you imagine? A living, breathing relic, right in our backyard." "That's something, Thomas," I managed to say. The words felt like gravel in my mouth. "Something? Dad, it's monumental. I'm heading up there tomorrow with a small team to cordon off the area. I wanted you to be the first to know. You spent your life in those woods. Did you ever see anything? Anything at all that was out of the ordinary?" The question hung in the air. A loaded weapon pointed right at my heart. Here it was, the moment I had dreaded for a lifetime. I could tell him. I could finally let it all out right here, right now, over a crackling phone line on a lonely mountain highway. The truth was a scream in my throat, desperate to get out. But the fear, that old familiar fear, was stronger. "Just bears and bad weather, son," I lied. And the sound of it was the ugliest thing I'd ever heard. "You know how those mountains are. They play tricks on you?" He sighed, a small puff of disappointment. "Yeah, I guess. Well, I'll let you go. Drive safe, Dad. I'll call you from the site." "You be careful up there, Thomas," I said, and my voice cracked on his name. "Always am," he said cheerfully. And then the line went dead. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under the tires. I turned off the engine and just sat there, the silence of the cab suddenly as heavy as the silence of the forest that day. He was going back there, tomorrow, back to that muddy creek, back to the place where the shadow lived. And he was going because I never told him not to. My lie hadn't just been a failure of courage, it was a failure of love. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had to tell him the truth. Not on the phone, face to face, before he walked back into those woods. I put the truck back in gear and pressed down on the accelerator, driving faster now, racing against 40 years of silence. The university campus was a different kind of wilderness. It was all manicured lawns, brick buildings covered in ivy, and the organized chaos of students hurrying between classes. It felt sterile, tamed, a world away from the raw, untamed power of the Sawtooths. I parked my old truck in a visitor's spot, the dented fender looking out of place next to a row of shiny, sensible cars. Every step I took on the clean concrete sidewalk felt wrong, like I was tracking mud into a pristine house. I found the biology department in a building named after some long-dead donor. The hallway smelled of floor wax and old paper, a scent so different from the pine and damp earth that was my life's perfume. I found Thomas's office on the 3rd floor. The door was slightly ajar. his name printed on a neat plaque, Dr. Thomas. I felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by a wave of cold fear. He was a doctor of this world, the world of facts and figures. How could he ever understand mine? I pushed the door open. The office was empty. Books were piled high on every surface, and scientific journals were stacked on the floor. A large computer monitor on his desk was glowing, displaying a complex image of lines and shadows. My son was here in these papers and diagrams, but he was gone. My heart sank. I was too late. "Can I help you?" a young voice asked from behind me. I turned to see a young man with glasses and a friendly face. He was holding a stack of folders. He looked like he couldn't be a day over 20. "I'm looking for Dr. Thomas," I said. "I'm his father, Arthur." The young man's face lit up. "Oh wow, it's an honor to meet you, sir. I'm Daniel, his research assistant. Dr. Thomas talks about you all the time. About your time as a ranger. Is he around?" I asked, my throat tight. Daniel shook his head, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir. You just missed him. He was so excited about the new data from the Sawtooth site, he decided to head up a day early. Left about an hour ago with the gear. He said the weather window was too perfect to waste. An hour. He was an hour ahead of me, heading right back to that place. The lie on the phone wasn't a lie of malice, but one of excitement. He wanted to get a head start on changing the world. He had no idea he was walking into a place that could unmake it. "The data," I said, nodding toward the glowing screen. "Is that it? From the radar?" "Yeah, it's incredible," Daniel said, walking over to the desk. He tapped a key and the image zoomed in. "Look at this. We're calling it the Sawtooth anomaly for now. See these impressions? They're sequential. A clear bipedal gait. Based on the depth and the pressure displacement, our models estimate a subject weight of over 800 pounds. And the stride, it's almost supernatural." I stared at the screen. It was a ghost rendered in pixels. There they were. The tracks I had seen with my own eyes now captured and quantified. The long, impossible stride. The deep, heavy press into the earth. Science had found my monster. They had given its shadow a weight and a measurement. Seeing it there, stripped of the forest, of the silence, of the fear, it didn't make it less real. It made it more terrifying. It was proof. Undeniable and cold. "He shouldn't have gone up there alone," I said, my voice low. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a statement of fact. Daniel looked a little confused. "Oh, he's not alone. He's got a small team, but he went ahead of them to mark the perimeter. He's a professional, sir. He knows those woods." "No," I said, my eyes still locked on the screen. "He doesn't. Not like I do." I remembered my father's words, his steady voice on our porch all those years ago. Some trees are best left standing. I had listened. I had left the secret buried, let it stand in the dark woods of my memory. But now my own son was walking into that same forest with an axe made of science, ready to chop it down and expose it to the light. He didn't understand that some things, when they fall, crush everything underneath. "Sir, are you okay?" Daniel asked, a note of concern in his voice. I turned away from the screen, from the digital ghost of my past. I looked at this well-meaning young man who saw a world-changing discovery, not a life-ending truth. Tell him I was here," I said, my voice thick with an urgency he couldn't possibly understand. "Tell him I'm coming." I didn't wait for his reply. I turned and walked out of the office, my boots echoing in the quiet, sterile hallway. I was moving faster now, almost running. The campus, the brick buildings, the manicured lawns, they all faded away. In my mind, I was already back in the Sawtooths. The race wasn't against the 40 years of silence anymore. It was against the 1 hour that separated my son from the truth, and I had a terrible feeling that I was going to lose. The drive up the mountain was a fight against ghosts. The ghost of my wife, Sarah, whose memory felt thin and pale against the vibrant, terrifying secret I'd kept from her. The ghost of my father, whose simple wisdom I had twisted into an excuse for cowardice. And the ghost in the trees, the one with no name, the one that had stolen the sound from the world that day 40 years ago. My old truck rattled and shook, the engine whining as I pushed it harder up the steep grades. I was an old man in an old machine, trying to outrun a memory that was ageless. I kept seeing it in flashes, projected onto the dark screen of the pine trees lining the road. The creek bed, the mud, the impossible size of the footprint I had found first. I remembered kneeling, tracing its outline with a trembling finger. It was 5 times the size of my own boot print, the toes splayed wide, a deep arch suggesting a weight I couldn't comprehend. But it wasn't the print that broke me. It was what I saw next. I had followed the tracks, my heart a cold stone in my chest. They led away from the creek and into a thicket of young firs. There I found a deer, or what was left of it. It had been snapped in half, its spine broken like a dry twig. There were no claw marks, no bite marks like a cougar or a bear would leave. It looked like it had been picked up and simply broken, the sheer impossible strength it would take to do that. I had backed away slowly, my hand on my hatchet, every nerve screaming, and that's when I heard it. A low sound, a guttural hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. It wasn't a growl of aggression. It was something else. It sounded like sorrow, a deep, ancient grief. I never saw it. I just felt it. A presence so vast and so lonely it hollowed me out. I ran. I abandoned my patrol, my duty, and I ran. The memory was so strong I flinched, my foot easing off the accelerator. And in that moment, the truck gave a final, shuddering cough. The engine sputtered, died, and then there was only the sound of the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder as I coasted to a stop. I turned the key. Nothing. I tried again. Just a dead click. I slammed my hand on the steering wheel, a wave of helpless fury washing over me. Of course it would happen now. 40 years of silence and my escape route had finally rusted through. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the cab pressing in on me. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, the same sound I'd heard that day. I was still miles from the Sawtooth trailhead where Thomas would be. No cell service up here. No cars on this old logging road. There was only one way forward. On foot. Through the woods. I opened the truck door, the rusty hinge groaning in protest. The air that hit my face was cold and sharp, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was the smell of my fear. My father's words echoed in my head, not as wisdom anymore, but as a curse. Some trees are best left standing. I had let this secret stand for so long it had become a petrified thing, a dead tree in the center of my life, and its roots had finally broken everything. My marriage, my peace of mind, and now my truck. It had left me stranded, with no choice but to walk back into the one place on earth I had sworn I'd never go again. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and looked up at the dense wall of forest that bordered the road. It looked darker than I remembered, the shadows between the trees deeper, longer. Somewhere in there, my son was walking toward a truth he thought was a scientific discovery. He saw a specimen to be studied. He didn't see the sorrow. He didn't know about the impossible strength or the sound of a world holding its breath. I had to reach him. I had to tell him that what he was hunting wasn't just an animal. It was a ghost. My ghost. And I had spent a lifetime running from it. But the running was over. With a deep breath that felt like breathing in dust and memories, I stepped off the road and into the trees, the soft pine needles crunching under my boots. I was a ranger again, but this time I wasn't on patrol. I was on a rescue mission, and I was terrified that the person I was trying to save was already lost. The drive up the mountain was a fight against ghosts. The ghost of my wife, Sarah, whose memory felt thin and pale against the vibrant, terrifying secret I'd kept from her. The ghost of my father, whose simple wisdom I had twisted into an excuse for cowardice. And the ghost in the trees, the one with no name, the one that had stolen the sound from the world that day 40 years ago. My old truck rattled and shook, the engine whining as I pushed it harder up the steep grades. I was an old man in an old machine, trying to outrun a memory that was ageless. The forest swallowed me whole. One step off the gravel road and the world changed. The air grew heavy, damp, thick with the smell of decay and life intertwined. It was a scent I had known for 50 years, the perfume of my life's work, but now it felt suffocating, like breathing in grave dirt. My boots, which had walked 1,000 miles of these trails, felt clumsy and loud on the carpet of dead pine needles. Every snap of a twig under my weight sounded like a gunshot in the profound silence. I moved slowly at first, my old bones protesting the uneven ground. My eyes, once sharp enough to spot a hawk's feather from 100 yards, struggled to adjust to the deep, shifting shadows. The sunlight was a distant memory, filtered through a dense canopy of fir and cedar, dappling the forest floor in pale, ghostly patterns. It was colder in here, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air and everything to do with memory. I tried to think like a ranger, to fall back on the old instincts. I looked for game trails, for the lay of the land, for the familiar landmarks that would lead me toward the Sawtooth trailhead. But my mind was a traitor. Instead of seeing a path, I saw the place where I found the deer, its body twisted into an impossible shape. Instead of hearing the wind, I heard the echo of that low, guttural hum that vibrated through the soles of my boots. A sound of immense sorrow. 40 years. For 40 years, I had told myself I ran because I was smart. I ran to protect my wife, Sarah. I ran to give my son Thomas a normal life, a father who wasn't haunted by shadows. I built a wall of silence around that day, brick by heavy brick. But walking through these trees again, I knew the truth. I didn't run to protect them. I ran because I was a coward. I had seen something that didn't fit into the world I understood. Something so powerful and so sad that it broke my nerve completely. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against the rough bark of an ancient Douglas fir. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of old bones. That's when I felt it. The same feeling from that day in '78. The sensation of being watched. It wasn't the prickling on your neck you get from a predator. This was different. It was a weight, an awareness, a vast, intelligent presence that knew every move I made. I scanned the trees around me, but there was nothing. Just the endless columns of trunks fading into the gloom. But the feeling was undeniable. I was not alone. I pushed myself off the tree and forced my legs to move faster. Panic was a cold liquid rising in my throat. I had to get to Thomas. He was walking into this with scientific curiosity, with instruments and theories. He was looking for an anomaly, a specimen. He had no concept of the sheer world-breaking reality of it. He didn't know that what he was hunting wasn't just an animal. It was an intelligence that had watched these mountains rise and fall, an ancient thing that could snap a man in two as easily as a twig and grieve for it after. My father's voice came back to me then, clear as if he were walking beside me. Some trees are best left standing. I had thought he meant secrets, that some truths were too dangerous to fell. I see now he meant it literally too. This forest, this place, held something that was not meant for our world of data and dissection. It was meant to be left alone, to stand in its own silence. And I, in my fear, had failed to pass that warning to my own son. I had let him believe the forest was just trees and rocks and animals you could tag and study. I stumbled into a small clearing and saw something that made my blood run cold. A footprint. It was pressed deep into the soft earth near a stream, partially filled with murky water. But there was no mistaking the shape, the immense size, the 5 splayed toes, the deep arch. It was fresh, impossibly fresh. The edges were still sharp, not yet eroded by the wind. My eyes followed the direction it was pointed, deeper into the sawtooth sector, toward the trailhead, toward my son, and then I heard it, far off, carried on the wind, a sound that ripped through 40 years of silence and struck me right in the soul. It was the crack of a rifle shot, followed by a sound that was not animal, not human, but something in between. A roar of pain and fury that shook the very air around me. Thomas. He had found it, or it had found him. That sound, it wasn't just a roar. In my 40 years as a ranger, I'd heard every cry the forest could make. I'd heard the scream of a mountain lion, the bellow of a bull moose, the terrifying growl of a mother bear defending her cubs. This was none of those. This was the sound of something ancient and vast, a sound that came from the earth itself. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, but underneath it, there was a fury so profound it felt like the mountains themselves were about to crack open. It was the sound of a god being wounded. For a full minute, I didn't move. My blood had turned to ice water in my veins and my feet felt rooted to the forest floor. Every instinct, every ounce of self-preservation I had, screamed at me to turn around, to get back to the road, to run and never look back. The 40 years of fear I'd carried, the secret that had hollowed me out, it all came rushing back, telling me I was a fool. But then, through the ringing in my ears, one word cut through the terror. Thomas. Something broke inside me then. The old, brittle dam of fear I had built around my heart just shattered. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was something deeper, something primal. The coward who had run from this forest in '78 was gone. In his place was just a father. My son was in there. My boy was hurt. I started to run. It wasn't the easy, ground-eating lope of my youth. It was the desperate, clumsy scramble of an old man. My lungs burned as I sucked in the cold, thin air. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging red lines on my weathered skin. I stumbled over unseen roots, catching myself on tree trunks. my hands raw against the bark. The forest that had once been my sanctuary was now a tangled enemy. Every fallen log a hurdle, every thorny bush a trap. I didn't care. I crashed through the underbrush, the sound of my own ragged breathing loud in the sudden, heavy silence that had fallen after the roar. I followed the echo of the gunshot, heading deeper into the sawtooth. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a flash of color that didn't belong. It was Thomas's bright orange backpack lying on its side near a cluster of ferns. It was open, its contents spilled onto the ground. A water bottle, a GPS unit, a half-eaten protein bar. It looked like it had been torn from his back. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knelt, my hand trembling as I touched the tough nylon fabric. There was a long, deep tear along the side, not made by any rock or branch. I pushed myself back to my feet, my eyes scanning the area. I was close. The musky, oily smell was stronger here, overwhelming. It was mixed with something else now, something sharp and metallic that I knew all too well. My father's warning echoed in my mind, but this time, it was an accusation. Some trees are best left standing. I finally understood. He wasn't just talking about secrets. He was talking about this ancient, sorrowful power that lived in the heart of these woods, a power that should have been left alone. And in my silence, in my cowardly refusal to tell my son the truth of what I saw, I had led him right to it. I had let him try to cut it down with science and reason. I followed the scent, moving faster, my body running on nothing but adrenaline and dread. I broke through a final line of dense fir trees and stumbled into a small, secluded meadow. The scene before me stole the breath from my lungs. There was a wide swath of flattened ferns and broken saplings, as if two giants had wrestled here. Thomas's rifle lay on the ground, its wooden stock snapped in two, and then I saw him, my son. He was slumped against the base of a massive cedar at the far edge of the clearing. His leg was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn, a bone clearly broken, but he was alive. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of pain and a level of shock I had never seen in a human being. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring back into the dark wall of trees from which I had just come. "Thomas," I breathed, my voice a ragged whisper. His head snapped toward me and a flicker of recognition, of relief, crossed his face. I started moving toward him, my legs feeling like lead. "Dad," he rasped, his voice cracking. He tried to push himself up but fell back with a gasp of pain. He raised a trembling hand and pointed, not at his leg but back toward the trees. It was trying to help," he stammered, his eyes glazed with disbelief. It touched my leg. The sound it made, it wasn't anger, Dad. It was crying." I stared at him, my mind struggling to connect his words to the scene around me. Crying? Trying to help? It didn't make any sense. The roar I heard was not a sound of sorrow. It was a sound of agony and rage. The snapped rifle, the torn backpack, his shattered leg. These were not the marks of a gentle helper. My 40 years of fear had a face, a shape, and it was a thing of terrifying power, not pity. "What are you talking about, son?" I asked, finally reaching him and dropping to my knees beside him. My hands hovered over his leg, the ranger in me assessing the damage even as the father in me recoiled from it. It was a bad break, a compound fracture of the tibia. The white of the bone was a stark, gruesome slash against his dirt and blood-smeared skin. "The shot," Thomas gasped, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I hit it, I shouldn't have. Dad, I was scared, it just appeared. It was so big. I panicked and I fired." His breathing hitched, a sob catching in his throat. "It went down. It screamed. That sound you must have heard. I thought I'd killed it. I started to back away, but my foot caught on a root and I fell." He winced, his eyes squeezing shut as a fresh wave of pain washed over him. I heard the bone snap. I think I yelled. He took a ragged breath and continued, his voice barely a whisper. "It got back up. It was hurt, limping, blood on its shoulder. It came toward me. I thought it was over. I closed my eyes, but it just knelt. It reached out a hand. Dad, a hand. It was huge, covered in dark hair, but the palm was leathery, like old skin. It touched my leg right here." He pointed to a spot just above the break, and it made this noise, a low rumbling sound, a whimper. Its eyes, they weren't angry. They were just sad, so incredibly sad. Then it looked back at the trees and just left. I listened, my world tilting on its axis. Every story I'd ever heard, every campfire tale painted this creature as a monster, a violent phantom of the woods. My own memory from '78 was one of pure, heart-stopping terror. I saw a shadow, a shape so massive and fast it defied reason, and I ran. I didn't stay to see its eyes. I didn't wait to hear it cry. I abandoned my post, filed a false report about a bear, and spent the next 4 decades trying to forget. Now looking at my son, I saw the truth. I hadn't been a prudent ranger that day. I had been a coward. My father's words weren't just a warning about nature. They were a warning about hubris. Some trees are best left standing. He meant some things are not for us to cut down, to categorize, to hunt, or even to understand. They are simply meant to be. In my fear, I had turned it into a monster. In his scientific curiosity, Thomas had turned it into a specimen to be proven. We were both wrong. We had both trespassed with violence in our hearts, mine with the violence of fear, his with the violence of discovery. The musky smell was still thick in the air, a constant reminder that we were not alone. The silence of the forest had returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was a watchful silence, a heavy blanket of awareness. I could feel it, a presence in the deep shadows of the ancient cedars, an intelligence that was waiting, observing. It wasn't malicious. It was grieving. "All right, son," I said, my voice finally steady. The old fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but something else was growing alongside it now, a profound and heavy sense of shame. "We need to set this leg. It's going to hurt." I took off my jacket and tore strips from my flannel shirt. As I worked, fashioning a crude splint from a fallen branch, I didn't look toward the trees. I didn't have to. I knew it was there. I could feel its sorrowful gaze on my back. It wasn't watching us as a predator watches its prey. It was watching us as one might watch a terrible, tragic mistake unfold. My son had wounded a god, and in return, the god had shown him pity before retreating to bleed in solitude. And I, the one who knew better, the one who had felt its presence 40 years ago, had done nothing to stop it. My silence had loaded my son's rifle. I finished tying the last strip of flannel around the makeshift splint. The silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. My son, Thomas, watched me with wide, pain-filled eyes. The color washed out of his face. The smell, that strange, musky odor of something wild and grieving, still clung to the air like a shroud. I knew we couldn't stay here. Every instinct I had screamed that this ground was sacred now, a place of pain we had caused and were no longer welcome in. "Can you stand?" I asked, my voice low. "I'll take most of your weight." He nodded, gritting his teeth. Getting him up was a slow, agonizing process. Every shift of his body sent a jolt of pain through him that was mirrored in his tight grip on my shoulder. With his arm draped around my neck and my arm cinched tight around his waist, we began the long, slow hobble back toward the trail. Each step was a monument to our failure. The forest floor, usually a familiar comfort to me, felt alien. Every snapped twig under my boots sounded like a gunshot in the crushing silence. The birds had not returned. We moved for what felt like hours. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and reach for us. I kept my eyes on the ground, focusing on the path, but my senses were stretched taut, scanning the periphery. I didn't feel hunted. That was the strangest part. The feeling was one of being observed, of being judged by an ancient, sorrowful presence. The fear I had carried for 40 years had been burned away, replaced by a hollow, aching shame that was far heavier. I had run from a shadow. My son had shot a soul. As we shuffled through a grove of old-growth cedars, their massive trunks like the pillars of a cathedral, a sound drifted through the trees. It wasn't the roar I had heard earlier, nor the scream Thomas had described. It was a low, resonant call, a single mournful note that seemed to make the very air vibrate. It was a sound of profound loss, a lament that echoed off the high canyon walls and faded into the twilight. It wasn't directed at us. It was a sound for the forest itself, a farewell to a part of its own heart. I stopped, holding Thomas steady as he leaned against me, breathing hard. He had heard it too. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. What was that? I didn't have an answer for him, not one that would make sense in the world we were trying to get back to. "It's saying goodbye," I said, and I knew in my bones it was the truth. It was hurt, it was grieving, and it was leaving. We had trespassed, and with our guns and our fear, We had broken something that could never be fixed. We had forced a god out of its own church. We didn't hear it again. The last mile to the truck was done in near darkness, with only the faint light of a rising moon to guide us. When the moonlight glinted off the windshield of my old Ford, it looked like an artifact from another planet. The metallic click of the door handle was an obscene noise in the sanctity of the woods. I managed to get Thomas settled in the passenger seat, his face a pale mask of exhaustion and pain. Before I got in, I stood for a moment and looked back into the impenetrable darkness of the Sawtooth sector. The musky smell was gone. The watchful presence had lifted. The forest was just a forest again, but it felt empty, hollowed out. The silence that remained was the normal kind, the simple absence of sound. But I knew I would forever carry the memory of that other silence, the heavy, living one. The official report cited a large, aggressive black bear. I said I'd fired a warning shot to scare it off after it had charged my son, causing him to fall and break his leg. It was another lie, but this one felt different. The first lie, 40 years ago, was to protect myself, to hide my cowardice. This one was to protect something else. It was to protect a memory, a secret that didn't belong to the world of reports and explanations. Some trees are best left standing. I finally understood what my father meant. You don't cut them down just to prove you can, or to see what's inside. You just let them be. Thomas recovered, though he walks with a slight limp to this day. We never spoke of what really happened out there again, not in plain words. But sometimes when we sit together on my porch in the evening, watching the light fade over the mountains, our eyes will meet. And in that shared glance, the truth is there. We both carry the weight of that day. He carries the memory of those sad, intelligent eyes. And I carry the knowledge that for 40 years I was afraid of the wrong thing. I wasn't afraid of a monster. I was afraid of myself.